What GASB tells us to do is to select a discount rate that matches our expectation on the return of assets used to finance the benefits. So if we were to pre-fund, put money away in advance for these benefits, let's say we could earn 7.75%. That happens to be the rate that CalPERS Retirement Health Fund, that's their expected return, 7.75%. So if we could earn 7.75%, then that's what our liability would be, a total of $92 million. Okay, let's compare that to what I call no pre-funding. So if we don't pre-fund at all, we don't put any money aside in advance, essentially the payments for retirees are coming from general county assets. So that's kind of our no pre-funding. And 5% was just the rate we assumed that county assets would return, a shorter term assumption. So this gives us an idea of the difference in the liabilities by pre-funding or not. And you can see that that $92 million goes up to $129 million if we discount at 5%. Okay? And so the discount rate has a pretty good impact on what our liability is. We break it down here between actives and retirees, just to kind of give you a flavor for where the liability sits and what group of employees. So far, so good on actuarial liabilities. Okay, so now we get to financial statement liability. So the county's, what goes in the county's CAFR, what affects the CAFR directly. So the actuarial liabilities that I just showed, they don't directly show up in the financial statements. They do end up in a footnote. Okay, so they end up in a footnote in the CAFR. The first item, the annual required contribution. That term, it's a GASB term. It's the same as what is used for pension accounting, but it's a little bit of a misnomer because there's nothing required about the annual required contribution. There's no contribution required. What it really is, it's an actuarially determined annual cost. So if we want to allocate costs to years, this is how we do it, based on the ARC, the annual required contribution. It consists of two components. One is a past service payment, and the other is a future service payment. So the amortization of the unfunded accrued liability, actual accrued liability, remember that's the past service payment. And so we take that and we amortize that cost over some period up to 30 years, but it can be shorter. And then the normal cost, were essentially, that's the annual cost of benefits accruing. So that's just the 1 year cost that continues as long as we have active employees. So those are the two components. The next item is the annual OPEB cost, or AOC. It's similar to the ARC. You can really think of it as the ARC, but that's what really hits the income statement as an expense, is the AOC. So it's pretty much the same as the ARC, and I show it in a later exhibit. I'll kind of use them together for when we talk about this in general, in a general sense. The bottom item is the NOO, net OPEB obligation, and that's the balance sheet liability. So the balance sheet liability is not the actuarial liability that we talked about. It's the accumulated difference between the ARC, or what the annual cost is, and what the county actually contributes. So basically, if any shortfall in contribution or payments, shortfall to what the annual cost should be, that accumulates over time, and that shows up on the balance sheet. Okay, so those are the main issues on financial statement liabilities, and now we'll show you some results here. Finally, he got the results, huh? The annual required contribution, I mentioned it's the sum of the past service payment and the future service payment. I'll see the numbers below, and I know it's a little bit small, but there's a reason behind this. But generally, that can range anywhere between 1.5 to, not can range. For Mendocino County, it ranges between roughly 1.5 to 3.5 times the current pay-as-you-go amount. So let's take the first, the chart on the left, and that's the smaller one, but or the number's a little bit smaller. The right-hand column is pay-as-you-go, and that number is 4,713,000. Okay, so that's the current, roughly the current pay-as-you-go amount for current retirees. The amounts next to it in the middle is, if we pre-fund this, what is the annual cost that I compare to that pay-as-you-go? And that's $6,634,000. I know that might be a little hard to read up on the screen. And as I mentioned, it's got the two components. One is the amortization of the actual accrued liability. That's the blue component, and that's $5,561,000. And then the other piece is the normal cost. Now, if we compare that to if we don't pre-fund, you'll notice that the normal cost stays the same. Okay, I'm sorry, it doesn't stay the same. I'm thinking of the next one. There's still the normal cost piece, and then there's the unfunded amortization piece. Now, this left chart is if we amortize those